Hawkeye presented a case today on TDO Clinical uh, about a tooth that there was a choice whether to treat it with a gentle wave or to do a surgical procedure. So it brought to mind this case. This case presented with a sinus tract. The case was treated with calcium hydroxide until the sinus tract resolved, and then the case was packed out with gutta percha and sealer. Several months later, the sinus tract returned, the gutta percha was removed, a gentle wave procedure was done, and the case was packed out. Sometime after that, the sinus tract reappeared. So an apical surgery was done, and we salvaged the root for SEM analysis. So we processed the root. I split it sagittally so I could divide the two parts in half, hoping to examine both sides of the root canal space. We were able to tease the gutta percha out of the canal, and now we have an opportunity to exactly examine how clean that root canal space is. It's covered with a lot of sealer. I believe two different kinds of sealer were used here in the different treatments. The last sealer was BCH sealer, and you can see there's still some gutta percha sticking against the wall and some sealer apically, but we're going to be able to examine the axial wall fairly closely. So I spent about 3 hours. I'm looking for a signature of any bacteria or biofilm. This is pretty tricky business. It takes some pattern recognition. And we looked at this very, very thoroughly. I'll give you just a brief outlook of how we did this. But basically, I was not able to detect any bacterial biofilms anywhere in the root. You have things that maybe can look like it, but you have to be careful in analyzing it, and you really need to go at it very high mag to make sure that it is really a bacterial morphotype. So an area like that, you go into and it looks initially like it may be a bacteria, but actually it isn't as you examine these at high power. Here's kind of a typical example that can be a biofilm, and when you actually go in and look at it, it isn't. Very similarly here, when you go up to about 10,000x, you can tell whether there's bacterial morphotypes there or not. So this just is kind of a overview of how we looked at this root. We looked very, very carefully. So to the extent that the SEM can determine whether there are bacterial morphotypes, I did not see any in this root at all, anywhere along the entire length of the segment on both sides. Here's an example that kind of looks like bacteria, but if you look at the metric, the scale there, these are way, way too small to be bacteria, and they're just simply chalcospheroids from some form of calcification. We also looked very carefully at the gutta percha cone itself to see what was on the surface, if maybe there were any bacterial morphotypes on the surface, and spent quite a bit of time looking at this, and there was nothing basically that I could detect. So I saw no evidence of bacteria. But what we did find is on the external root surface, they had this root gnar. We call it root gnar. And when we went in and took a look at this very carefully, the story was quite a bit different. So this was sticking on the external root surface on the cementum, and when you actually take a look at this, there's bacterial morphotypes everywhere. The root gnar is just impregnated. These are yeasts actually on the surface. It's actually a huge biofilm on the cementum. Here you can see the classic bacterial morphotypes. The entire area is just impregnated with a massive, massive biofilm. Those are the fungi. And no matter where you looked in this external accretion on the end of the root, you see just massive bacterial impregnation of the root surface. So I think it's certainly a good inference that retreating this probably would not have done that. I do not believe that GentleWave can actually get rid of external biofilm on the external root surface. So I think the choice of doing an apical on this particular tooth was a smart one. Of course, you can't tell unless you actually go in and look at it. Here's some more bacterial morphotypes in very thick EPS. So I thought you'd be interested in seeing the case as it does apply to what Hawkeye was talking about this morning.